The Mongolians of the steppe carry many sacred traditions and belief. For instance, in the Mongolian tradition, memories and bonds are not formed based on appearances or by sounds, but by smell. Indeed, when family members, friends, or lovers embrace, it is not simply an act of physical connection, but a chance to smell the other, because smell has very important meaning to the Mongolian people. Remembering another's scent is the same as remembering them in your heart. Strange as it may seem, it is the way of the people of the steppe and has been for generations. No matter how long two may be apart or how far away they go, if they carry the other person in their heart, then they will always know them by their scent. Alahai knows this well. Alahai was a beautiful woman. She was described as a jewel of the cold steppe. Her hair as black as a raven's wing, her face as fair as fallen snow. Her body curvaceous and appealing, she was seen as a treasure to the men of her clan and tribe. But there were also those who hesitated to go near her, for Alahai carries a darkness behind her beautiful smile, a sorrow that many knew, though she did not voice it. For when she was 10 years old, Alahai was betrothed in an arranged marriage with a young man from another clan named Yaman. He was only 2 years older than her, and he was handsome. He promised himself to her, and he would work for her and her family for an allotted time until he was deemed worthy to be her husband, as was the tradition. But after the first year of working, that was when the Uvas clan raided. The Uvas were small. They had always been an afterthought and easily ignored, but this time they were not alone. They were not underarmed. They were strengthened and emboldened by arms and armor of a foreign group. Knights, the Blackstone Legion. Of course, the Mongolians knew of Heathmore and its factions, its endless wars and its barbarism, but they'd always stayed in their own lands and left the Mongolians be, so why were they here now? Why were these Uvas soldiers with weapons and armor of the knights? It made no sense. And Alahai had no chance to inquire, for her husband took his wife and got her to a horse, ordering her to flee to the home of his own clan to the northwest. She did, and rode away fast. She would never see Yaman again, nor would she ever see her parents, her friends, or her neighbors. There was no need to even try. The Uvas were ruthless, and their Blackstone benefactors were no less so. She knew the fate of her fiancé, and it boiled her blood. Alahai eventually discovered the home of her fiancé, the Hatajin. They were devastated to learn the news of Yaman and the fate of the Alahai tribe, and were willing to accept her into their clan. After a few more years passed, Alahai had grown comfortable in the home of the Hatajin clan. They were strong, resourceful, and unwavering in their belief and tradition. Even the Uvas, with their Blackstone backing, were hesitant to start a war with the Hatajin, which assured Alahai protection and security. However, Alahai's anger towards the Uvas and the Blackstones never died. In her heart of hearts, she cursed them. Every single one of them. The Uvas, the Blackstones, Apollyon. All were her enemies. All were hers to hate and to loathe. So she learned the ways of war. She rode with hunters, warriors, wrestlers, and skinners. She took up sabers and learned to duel, even alongside long-seasoned warriors. Alahai gained a moniker among the clan, Ervis Hatun, the Leopard Queen, for she was as ruthless, ferocious, and mysterious as the mystical cats that roamed the mountain. And thanks to the actions of the Uvas and the Blackstones, all the tribes and clans were now at war. The old confederations were torn, and war was constant on the steppe, just as Apollyon wanted it. And fighting among the Hatajin forces with Alahai was Ervis Hatun, the Leopard Queen. When she turned 25 years old, Alahai finally stopped going to war. Though there were still fights to be had, and she knew wars to wage still existed, she had something new to do. She had found something new to focus on, a new distraction to hone in on that took her mind away from her sworn enemies. She'd married a young man named Batuhan, not only a former friend of her fiancé back when she was young, but also a noble warrior who'd fought beside her in more than a few battles. He'd come to love her, and she him, and the two agreed to wed, and it was from their union that Alahai finally brought something into this world to ease her hating heart. A little boy. He was small, tender, and afraid, but she loved him. She loved him with such devotion she could not bear the idea of seeing him live in a world of war like this one. She spent so many nights crying beside her son, asking his forgiveness for birthing him in a world such as this. A world of vengeance, hate, and blood. He deserved the world she'd once had, of happiness, peace, and prosperity. She named him Bayar, for it means joy, and she wished for him to always have joy in his life, though she felt in her heart that she never would. Bayar spent the barely a year of his infancy with his mother and father, but life in the steppe was changing, and changing fast. The wars of the steppe were beginning to end, and the cause of this peace was Gulin Hatun. Though none knew her before now, she had grown in strength over the years, amassing wealth, power, and reputation. Through her strength of arms, she'd broken the backs of several large clans and tribes and had brought others under her banner. It was on a misty morning on the steppe that a delegation from Gulin arrived to meet the Hatajin clan. To Alahai's shock and disgust, the envoys were Uvas. For the Uvas clan had submitted to Gulin and were now one with her great Khanate. The message they bore was a message from Gulin herself, and it read, "Noble Hatajin clan, yours is a proud and respected people. You have stood many years against much adversity, and for this you should be commended. But a new age is coming, an era of peace for our tribes and clans. I, Gulin Hatun, will unify the steppe under one banner, and we shall all share in the prosperity and peace that is to follow. I invite you to join me. Leave your past grievances behind and stand beside us. With our combined strength, not even the great Heathmore will be our equal. We shall bring an end to war and be the shepherds this world needs. Or you can choose to resist and refuse me, and therefore be culled. The choice is yours." Immediately, the Hatajin clan held a Kurultai to discuss the situation. It was true. To stand against Gulin was suicide. They lacked the numbers or strength to oppose her. "We would be foolish to refuse," one elder spoke up. "The message she offers is one that benefits our clan." "We would lose who we are," another young man shouted. "Who are we if we are no longer Hatajin? We're dead if we refuse, and the Hatajin die with us. The Hatajin die if we accept as well." The arguments turned heated, and more than once the clan leaders had to bring the Kurultai back to order. When Alahai's time came to speak, she was hesitant, tempted to say nothing. She thought on the message of Gulin and what she had said. Not even the great Heathmore would be our equal. That implication was clear. At last she spoke, and her words were recorded thus. "There is no question that Gulin is powerful, and her message is honeyed with promises of peace and prosperity. But they mask the true intentions of a serpent. Not even the great Heathmore would be our equal. Those are her words, and they reveal her ambition. When she is through with the steppe, she will set her sights on our neighbors to the south. She will bring us all into further conflict, to battle the knights, Vikings, samurai, and her old foes, the Gulin. She is no peace bringer. She's no herald of hope for our lands. She will drag us out of one conflict and directly into a greater one, against enemies we know little about, and in lands we've never set foot in." "But my love," Batu Han argued, "think of our son." "I do," she answered him. "With all my heart I think of him. But that is why this promise fills me with fear. Do I condemn us to die at the hands of Gulin? Or submit my son to a life of loss, misery, suffering, and war? Which choice is kinder?" All sat in silence at the words of Alahai, the Ervis Hatun. "Your words ring true, Leopard Queen," the old Han finally spoke up weakly. "I fear you are right. Gulin will lead us into further war. But I cannot condemn us to death merely on the fear of what may befall us in the future. I have heard how Gulin works, how she treats those who do not submit. Even the cursed Uvas have submitted to her. So as much as it pains me to say, I believe it would be wise to agree to her terms." The Kurultai ended with his declaration, and Alahai sat in pained remorse, wrapped in the embrace of her husband. This was the decision of the clan, and Alahai had to accept it. The day Gulin rode into the village, the chief was there with gifts to offer and complete supplication. Gulin removed her frightful mask to look about at the crowd, their fearful smiles, their sweaty brows, their nervous glances. She knew these looks well, the looks of those surrendering not out of loyalty but out of fear. This was good, but then she noticed a woman holding a baby in her arms. Her eyes were not filled with fear. but rage, hatred. She had looked from Gulin to her baby in her arms, and each time her eyes darted to the sun, they always calmed down. She was a predator mother. She felt cornered by another stronger hunter. This had to be dealt with. "You there, step forward," Gulin announced. Alahai stepped forward slowly, her son cooing in her arms. "What is your name?" "Irvis Hatun." "A fitting name for a predator. What is your given name?" "Alahai." "Alahai. Is there something you wish to say?" she asked. "You seem unhappy with the choice of your tribe. Unhappy with me. Speak your mind, Leopard Queen. I welcome your words." "You would welcome what I say with my lips, but not what I say with my heart." "Then speak with your heart," Gulin snapped. "Say what it is you wish to say." "Alahai, please," her clansmen pleaded. But their voices were beyond her. All she saw, all she heard, all she could smell were the sounds, sights, and scents of war. The sounds of her first fiancé screaming for her to run for her life from the Uvas and the Blackstones. The sight of her parents being gutted by the Uvas and the Blackstones. The smell of blood and death about her on the battlefield. And the weight of her baby being forced to live amongst it. She finally glared Gulin in the face. "My heart will speak, and it says to you, I am not your wolf, Apollyon." Gulin would have accepted any insult, any argument, any condemnation or word of anger thrown at her, for she was a patient woman, and she had heard many angry accusations and insults before and dismissed them. They were not worthy getting angry over. But to be compared to Apollyon, to be likened to the she-wolf who orchestrated the destruction of her own tribe and family, it was a blow she was not prepared to receive. The Mongols of both sides watched as Gulin's body went rigged, and a vein in her forehead throbbed as her mouth curled into an angry sneer. But Alahai did not wait for swords to draw. She turned and she ran. She ran fast and hard to her horse. She heard shouting, she heard screaming, and she heard the sound of her husband drawing his blade. She dared to look back, dared to watch as her husband crossed a sword against Gulin to stop her from drawing a bow. She sobbed, but did not stop riding. Her son was crying. He didn't know what was happening, and he was scared. She could not go back. The clan might be spared if she leaves and never returns. They might still live, but she would not. She could not stay. She knew not what waited for her in the mountains, but she knew that she would not allow her son to be a pawn or a victim of Gulin's mad quest for some utopia paid for in blood. Days turned to weeks, weeks into months. For 7 long months in the bitter cold of the mountain, Alahai took refuge in dank caves. Food was slim. She had to risk leaving her baby boy alone while she hunted. And when she was successful, she had to make sure the food was suitable. But when she was not, she had to give what little was available to Bayar. She had little milk to feed him with, little for herself to eat. Bayar cried often, not from just discomfort, but from sickness. The cold air and the wet cave they hid in were not helping him. Her son was dying. She cursed herself. She screamed at the howling winds and the chilling blizzards, but she wept hardest for her own foolishness. She knew now that she should never have run. Her foolish pride and selfish actions led her and her son to this. She had taken her son away from a life of war, but had instead condemned him to a cold, miserable death in the mountains. "I am not worthy to be your mother," she wept to the scarcely breathing baby boy. "My wicked heart has brought you to this. But if there is any mercy in this world, any forgiveness, then bestow it to Bayar. Give it all to my son and leave none for me. I will return to Gulin and accept my fate, whatever it may be, if Bayar will but live." She lay beside her son and she cried, holding him, using her soaking fur coat to try and warm him as she shivered. She breathed in her child, smelled him and the death upon him, masking that familiar, lovely scent. If this was to be his death, then she would die with him.
Please, save my Bayar.
Alakhai awoke to the sound of footsteps on the mountainside just outside her cave. She reached for her sword, but knew she had no strength with which to fight. Was it Gulin come to kill her? Was it the Hatajin to come and save her? No, life is never so simple. Two figures entered the cave, one adorned in steel armor and a cowl upon her. On her back was a great kite shield, and in her hand a broadsword. Her armor was black and white, though her eyes were a stunning blue. Her vestments reminded her of warriors of the Blackstone Legion, but she was not one. She was a knight. She knew not from where. The second figure was no knight, but she wore armored vestments as well. Her face was covered, and she wore a helm atop her head. She carried a short striking mace and a round shield in her hand like a buckler. She was shorter than the knight, and her armor hugged her frame more tightly.
Lady Deborah, the young woman said in a faint accent, what is this? Quiet, Lamia. Quickly, fetch firewood from outside and bring it. Time is short, and this one is dying. Alahai hissed and found the strength to raise her sword at the newcomer. Deborah stared at the blade and stopped moving. Lamia pulled her mace, but did not attack. Stay away, Alahai hissed. If you wish to die, so be it, Deborah answered coldly. But the child you hold is too young to decide that himself. Hand him over so I may yet save him. No. Bayar is... She tried to argue, but her strength was fading fast. Her energy was gone. She had none left as the sword fell from her hand with a clatter. Deborah moved swiftly and pushed the sword aside with one hand as she caught Alahai's head with the other before it crashed at the ground. The baby's cries were choked. He was struggling to draw breath. We have no time. With or without thy consent, I shall save you. Choose to hate me if you will when you are well again. Lamia, to work. We need fire fast. At once.
Alahai could not respond as she sank into unconsciousness. Alahai opened her eyes once more. She had no idea how long she'd been asleep, but as she sat up, she was wearing warm clothing, resting under a fur skin made from sheep wool. Standing by the fire was Lamia, holding a bundle, her baby Bayar, who was at last sleeping peacefully.
My son, he is alive and healing,
a voice spoke up. Alahai turned to see Deborah approaching. Her helmet was off, her long hair tied back in a bun, and her face, though lined with fatigue and stress, looked rather youthful despite being a woman in her 40s or 50s. The woman knelt down before Alahai, and there was a faint smile on her face. As are you.
Who are you? She demanded. Servants of Apollyon?
Apollyon is dead, child, Deborah explained. You are not from Heathmoor, I take it. So how do you know of Apollyon? Alahai, seeing that she was at the mercy of these strangers, confessed to them both. She told them everything, of her home, of the Mongols, of Yaman, of the Uvar, the Hatajin, of Batahun, of Gulin. When she had finished speaking and telling of all these things, Deborah nodded her head wearily. Your story is a very sad tale, child. My heart goes with you, she explained. But the Blackstone Legion and Apollyon are no more. Their successors, Astria and her Order of Horkos, are the new powers in Heathmoor.
Astria? Horkos? I do not understand.
Then listen, and I shall tell you what I know. The two women spoke and shared, with Lamia cutting in every so often and offered a perspective or further information. Bayar only woke once or twice to wail or crave attention, but otherwise was at least peaceful and calm. By the time the woman had said all they could, Alahai now knew Heathmoor's state of being, and it was nothing like she thought. Horkos will claim all of Heathmoor before the winter is out, Deborah confirmed. Rumor has it she's allying with General Jur of the Gulin to unify their strength and complete her goal.
Jur, Alahai scoffed. We know that name in the steppe. A snake, if ever there was one. I doubt the alliance is anything more than a ruse or some kind of ploy. Regardless, you say that Gulin Hatun seeks to conquer Heathmoor? I'm certain of it, Alahai answered. That is why I fled with Bayar. I wanted to protect him from the war that Gulin will bring upon us all. Her talks of peace are nothing but a lie. She seeks peace by means of the sword, and Heathmoor will not cave willingly. No, they will not, especially not Astria, Lamia growled. But I was a fool, Alia lamented. In my goal to protect my son, I was blinded by my own folly and my own selfish hatred. my loathing for war, my hate for the Uvar, my fear of the Blackstones. I ran away from my people and condemned my son to death in these mountains. There's nowhere for me to run. If I go home, if I'm not killed, I'll be conscripted to fight with Gulin and my clan. If I go to Heathmoor, I'll be a stranger in a land that does not welcome them. If I stay here, I freeze to death with Bayar.
Then what will you do, child? Deborah asked. Alakhai looked at the peaceful Bayar and stood on shaking legs, approaching slowly and with meaning. Lamia held out the baby, and Alahai leaned close to embrace him.
A mother's purpose is to protect her child and to raise him, to nurture him, and to love him, to do what is best for him, even die for him if she must. She felt warm tears run down her face and drip on the baby's head. I failed my purpose. I'm not worthy to call myself your mother, little Bayar.
Do not say such things, Deborah countered. Your actions were all for his sake, and so is this one, Alahai responded.
Miss Deborah, take my son.
What? Take him.
You are a kind-hearted woman, I can see this. Surely you know somewhere he can be free, be safe.
Are you mad? She demanded.
You would hand over your own child to me. He has no future with me. Nowhere I go will give him what he needs, Alahai pleaded, tears running down her cheeks. Can you guarantee that were I to settle in Heathmoor with him, I would be accepted? When Gulin invades and war with my people begin, will I not be brought under suspicion?
Deborah said nothing, for the answer was not one she wanted to voice.
Surely there is a place my son will find sanctuary.
There is a monk named Bao Shen. He and his wife have established a village on the borders of Ashfeld and Valkenheim. He is a friend and brother of my church. I believe he might be willing to take care of the child.
Can he keep Bayar safe?
These are uncertain times, Alahai. I can promise nothing, but if you truly wish for your son to find sanctuary, Bao Shen can provide it. Alahai gave a gentle nod.
Then take him there. Please. But what of you? I'll return to my clan, plead for amnesty from Gulin and fight her war. Maybe in doing so I will steer her away from this village of Bao Shen, Alahai replied. But I cannot. I will not let my son suffer the way I did. Let him grow up to fight in Gulin's useless wars.
Deborah locked eyes with Alahai before closing hers and accepting her wishes.
Lamia, wrap the child tightly for travel. We leave at first light.
Lamia looked from Deborah to Alahai, both women firm in their conviction, and then she hurried to perform her duties. When Alahai looked at her son, carried away in the arms of another, she felt her heart rush after to chase them, only for her will to strangle it and yank it back.
A heart full of hate has no right to share love, she hissed at herself. Your hate nearly killed your son. Now let him go and drown in your fate.
Despite this, when Deborah and Lamia said their goodbyes and vanished into the snowy wilderness, Alahai screamed in lamentation and remorse. They say the mountain itself wailed in agony that morning. The Hatajin were stunned to see Alahai return from the mountains after nearly a year of absence. They had survived Gulin's wrath, for only she had stood against the Hatun. Her husband, Batahun, though, had attacked Gulin to stop her from firing a shot at Alahai, so he had been slain. This news tore at Alahai's already wounded heart, but she accepted it. The Hatajin were now allied with Gulin and prepared for war with Heathmoor. She approached Gulin on her own terms and knelt to the leader of the Mongols. Gulin had not forgotten her disrespect, but knowing a great battle lay ahead, she decided it was more beneficial to leave her alive and let her take part in it. Seeing as she had returned without her son or her husband, surely she was now broken, and in many respects she was correct. Preparations were needed, and Gulin instructed Alahai to prepare her clan for war. 5 years passed before the time came to invade. Alahai, now a 30-year-old woman, still husbandless and childless, had become a ruthless warrior in the service of Gulin. She bore a black steel skull mask, wearing dark blue fur and garments like a ghost. She fought with savage ferocity and slew her foes with cunning efficiency. As Alahai suspected, General Zhe had betrayed Astria. The way was open for Gulin and her forces to storm Heathmoor, and Alahai was there among the combatants, slaughtering Horkos warriors to a man. Knights, Vikings, samurai, Wulin, foreign outlanders. Nothing to her. If they attacked, she cut them down. When Astria was captured, Horkos was on the run, and all of Heathmoor stunned by the sudden shift in power, the Mongols began their expansion in earnest. The time Gulin viewed Alahai as a Batar, a hero of the Mongols. She granted her the true title of Ervis Hatun and gave her a detachment of other Mongols to lead on various expeditions and raids around Heathmoor to weaken and terrify the locals into compliance. Alahai was obedient and followed her orders well. But one day, something changed. Alahai and 4 other Hatuns rode to a small village between Valkenheim and Ashfeld. There were few knights or Vikings around to defend it. The most notable thing in the village was a small cathedral looking only recently built and ramshackled together. Yet there were figures who walked around the village of Viking and knight lineage, it seemed. Some kind of unified group, perhaps? It didn't matter, of course. She got off her horse and ordered her followers to wait for her while she scouted the defenses. With careful cunning, she walked about the walls and hid in dark places so none could see her. She watched for signs of guard shifts and changes, listened for the sounds of men or women drawing close. She hid herself behind a large stack of barrels. She waited patiently and listened. Bayar! Her heart stopped. Her eyes widened and she turned her head fast to see where the noise had come from. There, standing along the dirt road, a small leather ball stitched together in his hand, was a little boy with dark hair like a raven's wing and eyes just like his father's. Bayar, she whispered weakly. He was 5, maybe 6 years old, but he was her son. She watched as the boy turned around, beaming brightly, such happiness in his face. Her eyes brimmed with tears as she beheld the boy, and she couldn't stop herself from removing her mask to see him for all he was. Look how you've grown, she sobbed. Father! Bayar cried. He ran to a man sitting on a small wooden bench. A Wulin, a brown-haired man with a small beard and a staff resting by his side. He wore the vestments of a Shaolin monk, and he had a gentle face. Where did you go, Bayar? Always wandering off like that. It will scare your mother to death. Mother. The word struck Alahai like a knife to the heart, and she turned away fast, gritting her teeth and wincing as tears ran from her face. Mother. Mother. Sorry, Father. Oh, do go easy on him, a woman's voice said. Alahai dared to steal a glance. A tall, very strong-looking woman had emerged from the house near the monk. She had long hair in a single braid, and she had toned, powerful muscles. Despite the scars and marks on her body from battle, she had a bright face, a beautiful smile. She knelt down and placed a hand on the little boy. He's just doing what all children do, aren't you? Mother, Bayar cried. Look how far I can kick, he cried. He struck the ball with his foot, as hard as he could, and the ball rolled well and truly away, right towards Alahai's hiding place. She froze as the ball bounced off the wall next to the barrels she hid behind. The ball rolled a few more times before resting just beside them. Bayar came up to grab it. He stooped down to pick up the leather ball, and Alahai held her breath. She dared not twitch, dared not move, and yet her hand yearned to reach for him, to touch him, to stroke his hair, to hold him again. My baby, she cried within the recesses of her own heart. But she stopped, her will overtaking her desire. She pulled her hand back. She dare not. She could not. She bit her lip in anguish and tore her eyes away from him. She couldn't bear to look at her son. He would take his ball and he would go, return to his new family, his better family. Bayar, what are you doing? The monk called. Father, I smelled something. Alahai's eyes widened. She dared peek and saw Bayar was not far, sniffing near the barrels curiously as if he were seeking the smell of some delicious sweet. He was smiling. He took a few steps closer. He was almost right on top of her when the monk ran forward and took his arm.
Son, come away from there. Snakes often hide in dark barrels like these.
But, Father, I smelled something familiar. What was it?
Perhaps it was bread, child, or wine. The baker's place is not far, and those barrels are often used to carry wine.
No, Father, I know those smells, but I know this one too. I don't know why.
Alahai could not stop from sobbing with joy and sorrow. He remembered her smell. He remembered her. Somewhere in his tiny heart there was still room for her. She lay there until the sun was setting, sobbing quietly to herself and cursing her fate, cursing her punishment, and making one final decision. You were gone some time, Ervis, one of the Hatuns muttered. Alahai said nothing as she rejoined her fellows. There were 5 of them, all standing by and looking at her. Her skull mask hid her expression. Her fur hat hid her disheveled hair. What of the defenses? The town is too well protected, she growled. Are you serious? Another laughed. We can see clearly there are only a handful of warriors in this village. It's a small, meaningless town, clearly only recently established. I said we leave it be, Alahai repeated. Now the other Hatun were confused. What did you discover, Alahai? They asked. She glared at them through her skull mask. What was Gulgin's orders about this village? She asked. We burn it, destroy it, and kill everyone to a man, as an example to the Viking knights' fortresses nearby. Do you think Gulgin would offer amnesty for this village? Alahai growled. What's gotten into you, Ervis? One Hatun demanded. You've never questioned Gulgin's orders. What are you playing at? I will go, and I will ask for amnesty. We have a job to do, the Hatun spat before turning to her fellows. Come, sisters, let's get to what... She never finished the order. Her head was on the ground before it could complete it. I told you, Alahai snarled. It is too well defended. Turning her gaze upon her once allies, the battle began, and blood splattered the snow. Alahai and her detachment never returned to Gulgin. Surprised, Gulgin sent another detachment to check on their progress, a month after they were dispatched. After another month of waiting, that second dispatchment had never returned either. Gulgin was confused. Was there an ambush force there that was attacking her forces before they got close? Was it elements of Horkos or some other group? A small part of her wanted to send a larger force to investigate, but chose against it. The fight with Horkos had been more costly than she'd expected, and she needed time to build up her forces again. After all, the Colosseum in Valkenheim, once known as the Pit, was almost done with its construction, and with it would come a series of games and battles. That village, in the end, was meaningless. She could deal with it another time if she really needed to. There were other ways into Ashfeld from Valkenheim, and she had other pressing matters to attend to. Meanwhile, while Gulgin plotted her Colosseum games and decided to play with her prisoners, a leopard sat under a tall, thick fir tree, staring below at the little village under the watchful eye of the mountains. She watched quietly with a sad smile as her joy played in this quiet town, away from the wars, away from the blood, away from the hate. It was all Alahai ever wanted for her son. Though she longed to touch him, to be a part of his life, for him to know her as she knew him, she was content, knowing that he knew her smell. His heart had not forgotten her, and that was enough. Therefore she would protect this village forever, and she would never enter it, a lonely ghost of the mountain, sobbing for the joy she could never reach.